This is 655 horsepower. This, less than 400. This is all-wheel drive and a hybrid. This is just a manual. This, $133,000. This, $156,000. Knowing all that, what would you do? In the sake of fairness, as we look at two completely different interpretations of the sports car equation, I feel compelled to remind you that this has two propulsion systems. Now that you better understand that concept, depending on where you get the weights and measures of this E-Ray, it's like 3,774 pounds, or depending how you express your weights and measures, 1,721 kilograms. With that. Oh, this is a fast car. Oh man. Wow. Wow. And it sounds, excuse my French, but fucking magnificent. Okay, let's put the excitement aside. I really haven't driven an E-Ray before. That said, I gotta try these other modes. Let's go into that's sport. It's not really a huge difference. There's an odd sound coming from this particular car. God, this is really good. I know what you're thinking. What about the Grand Sport? Well, truth be told, we shot this episode with the E-Ray before we shot this. So this is coming. E-Ray's no longer here. So I guess it's more about cheap 911 against Grand Sport. So yes, this may be the cheap seats of the Porsche 911 world, at least one with a manual transmission. But Zuffenhausen, they even take this end of the spectrum seriously, as evidenced by 3,355 pounds, or, depending on how you express your weights and measures, 1,522 kilograms. That brings about a rather unique distinction. No, not the latest 911 on offer, the second latest, with that normal mode. Wow! It doesn't have quite the high notes of GT cars, but then again, this is half the price of a GT car. Put that aside, you can immediately tell this is the base car because it's under 400 horsepower. I get it, I understand. You gotta have differentiation between this, the S, the GTS, all that kind of stuff. But you're charging me a hell of a lot of money. This is a 911. I think you need more power. But here's the funny thing about this. I'm kind of in the minority, at least based on the comments from the episode we put out about the .2 Carrera, the one with the PDK. You guys are not fussed by the lower horsepower. Like, I'm fine with it. I don't need to be a race car driver in my 911 on the street. So at some point in this little telenovela, we have to say the quiet part out loud. No, this is not a fair fight. However, these two are together really for two reasons. Number one, this is about as close as they get these things together on money. And number two, most car freaks, they kind of pit these two together, whether they want to pick at their friends or in terms of performance, especially since the equation got closer. One's mid-engine, one's rear-engine. However, if it were a fair fight, This would be the GTS, which also is a hybrid and also can be had as all-wheel drive. However, that wouldn't be a fair fight because that one, at least the one we drove, was $204,000. Even the base price was like $170,000. So if we look at the things that we can compare in terms of apples to apples, let's talk brakes. How about that? The brakes on this have been upsized, big doing going to the .2, where they're now 350 mils all the way around. Now on this side of the fence, the brakes, they're bigger. Why? Because the car is bigger. 400 mils in the front, 380 mils in the back. And that's when we get into the question, is there a way to make this a very fair fight? So we look at things like 0 to 60. This is over a second faster. Then we look at other Corvettes to make it more of a fair fight. Even the most basic Corvette, over 100 horsepower more than the most basic Porsche 911. Then we could look at the other end of the spectrum and say, like the full fat flavor of the new .2 Turbo S, that is crazy fast, also crazy expensive. But then there's a ZR1 and a ZR1X, which, yes, expensive for a Corvette, but more powerful than the 911. So that brings us back to, can we make this fair in any measure? And it turns out there actually is one data point, and it's only these two specific models where it's the same. And that is the VMAX, 183 miles an hour. So I'm going to say the quiet part out loud before we jump into this, the most challenging aspect in the battle of the son of Kentucky against the most well-known son of von Zuffenhausen, and that is driving dynamics. With that, we'll start with the basic mode, the Tour. And, oh, this is this fucking car. It's unusually well-balanced, and granted, it has an advantage that the engine's now in the right place. Let's go up to, that's my mode, let's go to Sport. And what's interesting, not a big difference between Tour and Sport in terms of driving dynamics. So when we get into the track, that it's almost too much. This is the mode where really your intestines will fall out of your body. And this is where one could say things become a bit more explosive, but that's not really the case. What's happening here is the car becomes like almost JDM. And that's something no 911 ever has done or will ever do. This kind of feels, I hate to say this, it almost feels like a box standard Elantra N. They designed this specifically into the car to have this almost racetrack feel to it. I get it, it's a thing, but this part of it, not my cup of tea. This is actually wonderful to drive around corners. That's one of the benefits of this being one of the lightest 911s on offer. To give you an idea, GT3s are like 3,250 pounds, 3,268 specifically for my car, and this is within 100 pounds of that. That's kind of shocking for a car that's the entry level. And that transforms where I put the weight, how quickly the car reacts, the steering. It's direct, it's not telepathic like a GT3's, but that's not what it's trying to be. Now, an interesting logistical note about this, a hybrid, there is no like dedicated EV mode, so you're not going to creep around the city or parking lots in full electrons. Then the hybrid system arrives at these points where the gas engine says, you know what, I think you got this in the front, I'm just going to take a break. And then it coasts. And you hear the whoosh of like the electric in the front. Unlike any other like hybrid or electric car, it's very George Jetson. But another way to put this, I think that's more prudent for our discussion, it's the polar opposite of the feel, the personality of that very dramatic 911. And so we arrive at that point of our discussion, where we have to visit that rather annoying aspect of life called reality. You see, it rears its ugly head in a couple of different areas when it comes to vehicles like these, biggest being money. Now, you and I can go back 5-6 years when the C8 was introduced to much fanfare because they moved the engine from there to there. But I would argue there was another equally important aspect that made these things stand out. It was a supercar, or sort of a supercar, you could have for the princely sum of $60,000 US. Now, why is that important? Well, the Supra, it kind of crapped on its doorstep to the point where the Supra does not exist anymore. Then the Z came out, and no one really buys those. And these, in 2023, they sold 53,700 of them. To put that kind of in perspective, high-volume sedans like Camrys, they sell 100,000 of them a year. So that brings us to this in our little competition. This is the closest I could find to that 911 because of the price, not because it's a hybrid. See, the E-Ray, it starts at $108,600. Now, there are good, better, and best when it comes to Corvettes, so depending on how you look at this, there are 3 different flavors. This is the best flavor, the 3LZ. That is $10,950. To get the car, it's basically the interior changes. And this is a huge deal. In 2025, they changed the interior where they got rid of the goofy buttons. Now it has toggle switches. Everything kind of works better, but that works in conjunction with you touch everything and it feels... I'm a Porsche guy. I'm telling you, it feels better than that 911 outside. That's kind of the deal here. But this car, it has 10 options, which total $22,610. Some of them have like this dress up with the carbon fiber. That's like $4,000. I wouldn't do that. This one has this very cool like light dance thing in the engine compartment. It's $1,600, but I think it's worth it. It's got the front axle lift, which it should be standard on all these cars. And then the most important option, this has tan seat belts, which come off the page with this stunning riptide blue exterior. I wouldn't have done the blackish brown. I would have done like a lighter, maybe not tan, but saddle with the tan belts or like a red belt. That's the beauty of Corvettes now. You can kind of customize them. Then we get to the total retail price. Now, of course, you have to pay the VIG, otherwise known as the destination from Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's like $2,000, which brings us to $133,505. That is not a cheap Corvette, especially when you can get a current Stingray. The most basic one can't be had for $60 anymore. They've gone up quite a bit in price. They're $70,000 US now. Now, on this side of the fence, you will not be surprised to learn it's more money. A lot more money. You see, the base price of this is $138,800. Now, technically, this is not the cheapest 992.2 on offer. This is a Carrera T. What does that mean? It is the cheapest 992.2 on offer with a manual transmission. Actually, the PDK you pay less for. We did an episode on that. You can click on that here. And really what these are about is getting the manual, but more importantly, not doing a lot of options. You see, if you get a lot of options in these things, it defeats the whole purpose. You might as well put that money into a better 911, even though you would be giving up the manual transmission. And they do these like detailed bits that speak to my car guy's soul. Like they have the mirror fairings are gray. They've got a wooden shift knob, which is magnificent. And they have these like manual transmission, like shifter patterns on the windows as well as on the dashboard. Then we get to this specific car, which has 8 options that total $16,150. There are 2 that really stand out because they're a lot of money. The front axle lift, which you need, that's $3,090. Of course, you have to have the extended gas tank, 22 gallons. That's cheap, $230. And then there's the interior on these things. Did I say a T is about picking out the options? This is one you kinda need. It's the full leather interior, but what they do is this modern interpretation of the classic Porsche tartan. But where they kind of fall off, it's black. The whole thing is black. There's no like pageantry on the inside with the exception of that shifter knob. So you see the tartan, but it's the same color as the leather and the door panels and all that kind of stuff. I would say let's have like a different color in there, maybe even the option of PETA, and maybe even not a full leather interior, so we don't pay almost $5,000 to get the tartan, because we want to keep this one inexpensive. Then one must pay the VIG, otherwise known as the Destination von Zuffenhausen, for an additional $2,000. That brings us to $156,945. So, full disclosure, I have recently been accused of being a GM fanboy now that I own a classic 80s GM car. However, that has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you here. The interior of this is utterly magnificent. And I say that because for the longest time, every car guy in the world, I don't care what region of the world you came from, everyone said, oh my God, the Corvette's a great car, ... for the money. The minute they switched, I want to say to the C7, the ... for the money kind of fell off, but the interior was still a bargain basement, but not good. This, it got good in 2020, but then in 25, man, whoa. And then, yeah, it's got squeaks. Please, can we have some, like, analog gates? It's a Corvette. I mean, that's what we want here. We want, like, an analog watch, an automatic watch here. You can do the screens here and here, because they gave you an extra one here. Fine, that's great. But we're so close, let's make it perfect. So, what's the next aspect of reality? That's when we get into, are these reliable? And for the most part, it's a General Motors car, so for a regular car, it's like stone cold reliable. For a supercar, it is the most reliable car on the planet. Now, I have a number of friends of mine that have these things. Like my friend Terry, he had to have one so badly. He was the first one on the block in California to get one, but to do it without paying over sticker, he flew all the way to Massachusetts and drove the car across the country. Now, him and many other people I know, there have been some teething problems. There were some electrical gremlins. I think the transmission had some recalls. But for the most part, most people are saying these things, it's like having a Toyota supercar in terms of reliability. Here, I am uniquely qualified to say yes, because I have been an owner of a 992 for over 2 years now. And for the most part, the car has been very reliable. Yeah, there's been like warranty recalls, nothing huge, teething problems. However, the big thing that you are going to deal with a car like this, and I have many friends of mine that have these things, not just in California, also in other places, you will test the limits of your glass, key, wheel, and tire insurance, which Porsche sells, and I never suggest extended warranties because I am cheap as the day is long. However, this is a must because why? I have made money on this policy. I popped so many tires. So there's that. Then we get to resale. That's not puppy dogs and roses. It's not bad, but it's not great. Now, these famously, for the past like 3 years, you could buy one of these things and you would make money because everyone wanted a C8 and they couldn't keep up with production. So it was kind of like a gimme. But now reality has reared its ugly head and you no longer make money on these, even on Z06s. So I did some digging on the E-Ray to try to find what's the market. Turns out there isn't enough data for even Kelley Blue Book to give us a Blue Book value on these cars, on this blue car, get it? So I did some digging on like Auto Trader, those kind of sites, and I found a range nationwide of 80,000 for high mileage cars, all the way up to 110,000 for like a fully loaded low mileage car. Now, if you go back to 2023, when this thing first came out, really was a 2024 car, the base price was about 105,000. So if you take into account like halfway in between that 80 and 110 and consider some options, you're getting about 91% return on your money. Now, of course, to get this whole comparison to work, what about the base car, which still has more horsepower than that Porsche? That one, the resale isn't as good. It's even at the $70,000 price. It was $65,000 just a year and a half ago. That is 84% return on your money. And this is where we see, wow, a significant difference in this little comparable between this and the Corvettes. You see, these, I tried to look for a 2023. I did a nationwide search. I didn't find many, a handful. And they range like around 120 with like higher miles, all the way up as high as $139,000 for a used cheap manual Porsche. Here's the thing. These cost, the base price, $118,000 back in 2023. So if you do the math, let's kind of take the middle of the range with a couple of like options like this car, you're actually kind of making money on the new car you bought back in 2023. Granted, there's the provision of you did get the car sticker, and here's where I want to get religious on you. Don't ever buy a car over sticker. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program. Then there's the taboo topic of fuel economy in sports cars. One would think this is atrocious. Up here, we're probably doing 12 to 15 MPG. However, on those road trips, I turned 28.6 MPG, and that was in the higher horsepower car. My GT3 Touring, which is a 500 horsepower car, I've done as high as 32 MPG. This one, back and forth to Orange County, I did as high as 29. This one, not so much. I expected a Corvette to have good fuel economy because one of the worst kept secrets in the world. Corvettes, at least on the highway, they got like 30 MPG. And I did the same on a 1,200 mile round trip out to Arizona. And I'm expecting 30 MPG, especially now this is a hybrid, probably better. 22. Like, what happened? Was it the weight? Or alternatively, this being a hybrid tuned specifically for performance, perhaps the throttle mapping, transmission mapping, maybe it's just not designed to give us the 30 MPG. That we can argue with Tony Romo when we see him on Inside the Moto Man studio. You probably have seen many episodes of me saying, Corvettes and American cars, performance cars, you buy them by the pound, where these you buy by the ounce. That was my nice way of saying, yeah, these are crazy expensive, but they are so much more precise. There's a unique feel to them, different, better than these. However, I can no longer say that, especially now with this 25 change with the interior that now makes it a vehicle I kind of want. So as much as the tribal people on the Corvette side want me to say this is a pile of garbage and walk off camera, and then the tribal people on the Porsche side want me to say this is a pile of garbage and walk off camera, I can't do that because they're both precise. Really, what you're buying is a different feel, even with the engines now closer. So the takeaway was it's the resale. That's the big difference. Now, will we see in perpetuity this crazy resale where these things continue to go up in value after you buy them 2 years down the road? Probably not, but I don't see a world where these have better resale than these unless you get like limited production cars like 01X with a manual transmission, which we would love. How about just a 01 with a manual transmission? Forget about the X part. Anyway, I'm one man. This is the point of the episode. I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, Motoman TV on Word, Motoman TV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, if you would like to see other films on the Dot 2, we have 2 others. You can see those here. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später. I have a theory about yellow cars. People, they lather themselves up and say, oh my God, I'm going to get a yellow car. And they spend time looking for a yellow car. Then they buy a yellow car. And then 2 weeks later, they go into their garage and they go, oh my God, I bought a yellow car.